A man was sorting through a veteran's belongings when he accidentally discovered a diary from World War II. At first, he thought it was just a boring notebook, but after reading it, he realized this wasn't an ordinary notebook, but rather the veteran's first-hand experiences on the battlefield. It even included many old photographs as illustrations. He was deeply drawn to this diary. The content was incredibly authentic. Not only were there detailed diagrams of weapons, but also the veteran's personal experiences after killing. So he privately took the diary home. After reading through all the content in one sitting, a bold idea suddenly came to his mind. He directly typed the content into his computer, without changing even a single word. After several days and nights of hard work, he finally finished copying all the content. However, just as he was struggling with the title, he suddenly saw a classic line inside. "The sand there is black." This instantly inspired him. He decisively typed the final title, Black Sand. But when filling in the author's name, he became conflicted for a moment. But in the end, greed overcame conscience, finally writing his own name in the author column. Afterwards, he printed all the manuscripts and sent them packaged to a publisher. Unexpectedly, in less than a day, he received a call from an editor who was extremely excited on the phone, constantly praising his talent, and even wanted to meet him to sign an exclusive deal. But Matthew, being an ordinary worker, had never experienced such a grand situation. Although he had carefully studied the diary, he hadn't completely memorized all the details. To avoid exposing his actions, he claimed he was very busy lately, so the meeting time was set for the end of the month. After returning home, he began planning, trying to absorb the content into his brain in a short time. So, he began to carefully study the diary, marking all the important places, even recording each battle. To better understand when the battles took place, he researched a large amount of historical materials. Through quick learning and training, he soon developed his own narrative style. After becoming familiar with everything, Matthew unhesitatingly tore up the veteran's diary and burned it all with fire, making the once existing memories disappear forever. When he arrived at the reception banquet, he immediately became the center of attention. The publication of Black Sand shocked the entire literary world. No one expected that the author behind it was such a young man. However, faced with other writers' questions, Matthew answered fluently. His competent and steady demeanor made him seem like an expert in the creative field, but his attention was soon diverted. Attracted by a seemingly ordinary girl, he gathered courage to approach her. Unexpectedly, the woman didn't want to chat with him much. She just wanted to meet the author of Black Sand. At that moment, a reporter found Matthew, hoping he would cooperate for an interview about Black Sand. At this point, the woman realized the man before her was the idol she had admired for so long. Beyond the awkwardness, her attitude toward Matthew immediately changed. But surprisingly, Matthew immediately invited the woman to have dinner with him. This made Anna feel honored, and the two fell in love from that point. From that moment, Matthew not only gained fame and fortune, but also won the favor of a beautiful, rich woman. Just with one literary work, he leaped into becoming the darling of high society. However, good times didn't last long. In a series of unexpected events that followed, he was gradually driven to a desperate situation. The first time Matthew met Anna's parents, unexpectedly, his father-in-law was a military enthusiast who immediately began showing off his collection and praised his son-in-law's war writing extensively. But not long after, Matthew received an urgent call from the publisher. To avoid arousing Anna's suspicion, he quickly made an excuse about poor reception to avoid Anna and went to the seaside alone to argue with the caller. It turned out that in the 3 years since Black Sand was published, Matthew hadn't written any other works and had already received large advance payments from the publisher. However, this call was to tell him to quickly submit a new work, or they would take him to court. This immediately left Matthew at a loss. All these actions were witnessed by his wife. She hurriedly found Matthew to inquire, but was simply brushed off by Matthew. But Anna, who thought of him as a literary genius, was already eager for a sneak peek. As a result, Matthew sat in front of the computer for 2 days, but couldn't write a single word. He was nearly at the breaking point. However, on his father-in-law's birthday, a distinguished guest came to the house. Through Anna's introduction, he learned this was her father's godson from his youth, who had come specially to celebrate his father-in-law's birthday. He also brought an expensive gift for his father-in-law, an antique book on military subjects. This delighted his father-in-law, but Matthew's face was full of embarrassment, because before the godson's arrival, he had also prepared an antique book for his father-in-law, but its fame was far inferior to the godson's book. Standing by the window that night, watching Anna's family, he felt a deep sense of inferiority. It was just a pane of glass, Yet it seemed to isolate him as an outsider. He wanted to integrate with them, but his own abilities were self-evident. The next day, he paced back and forth in front of the computer, still unable to write a single word. Suddenly, the sound of laughter came from outside. It was Anna chatting happily with her older brother. This scene made his heart grow darker. To calm his discontent, he forced himself to sit down, but his brain had no knowledge reserves. Because of this, he had to open a novel he had written before and change the author's name to someone else, then directly print it out. When his wife came to find him, she discovered the manuscript hidden in his backpack. When Anna asked about the work, Matthew lied that the publisher asked him to review it, but his own creative schedule was too tight. He didn't have much time for review, so he begged Anna to look at it first. Anna took this task very seriously, often carefully reading the work. This filled Matthew with expectation, but unexpectedly, his wife not only criticized it without reservation, but also completely disparaged the new work, even saying the level was worse than an elementary school student's. This immediately put Matthew in an awkward position, but Anna, to highlight Matthew's talent, praised him as the prince charming in her heart, saying no one in the world could compare to him. This left Matthew momentarily speechless. But during a meal, Matthew received a call from the bank, stating that the publisher would freeze all his accounts. If he didn't take any action, the bank would also freeze the account. Matthew wanted to continue explaining, but the other party had already hung up. Looking at the hard-earned happiness before him, Matthew didn't want to lose it, so he drove alone on the road, speeding, trying to release his suppressed feelings. When he parked the car in the woods, his thoughts finally gained some quiet, but the anxiety in his heart couldn't be relieved. He banged his head against the car window, took out an iron bar and smashed the windshield, and tore his clothes, pretending to have just been robbed. Soon, he arrived at the hospital and received detailed questioning from the police. At this time, Anna ran over, hugging him lovingly in her arms. Afterwards, he called the publisher, claiming his computer was smashed by robbers and the manuscript hadn't been backed up. He would need a lot of time to rewrite it. With such fraudulent methods, the publisher had no choice but to temporarily delay freezing his account. However, just as he hung up the phone, another call came in. Matthew kept calling to the other party, but never heard any sound. But soon, the other party hung up. Matthew didn't pay much attention to this. However, in the evening, his father-in-law gave Matthew a letter, saying a stranger had suddenly visited and asked him to pass it to Matthew. Matthew immediately opened the letter. Inside was actually a photo of the veteran. This immediately threw him into panic. He knew someone was definitely targeting him. However, at the next day's book signing, a mysterious older man suddenly appeared. He didn't ask Matthew for an autograph, but said he was a friend of the protagonist, and warned Matthew not to desecrate the memories of the dead, then walked toward Anna. This made Matthew somewhat panicked. He hurriedly stopped the older man. Even after the signing ended, the older man still chose not to leave. Matthew quickly went to meet him. When the man mentioned the leather diary, he had already guessed the man's intentions. The man said he wanted 50,000 euros. If not given, he would call all his comrades to expose him. This left Matthew no choice. He could only agree to the demand for now, but this amount of money for him was simply an astronomical figure. After this, Matthew was distracted all day. Even when an unknown call came in, he promptly hung up. But what he didn't expect was, the older man called his father-in-law's home, forcing him to answer. But faced with the older man's pressing demands, Matthew was completely out of options. So he looked at his father-in-law's antique gun collection. In the dead of night, he dressed in all black, sneaked into his father-in-law's study, and stole an intact antique gun. To create the appearance of a break-in, he broke the glass on the door. Soon, the police made a simple investigation, but Matthew seemed very anxious and unusually concerned about the matter. His behavior was observed by his brother-in-law, who became more suspicious of him. So, taking advantage of no one being upstairs, he secretly entered Matthew's room. After looking around, he found nothing, but soon noticed an old-fashioned box with a backpack inside. Without hesitation, he pulled it out. However, just as he opened it, Matthew happened to walk into the room. Their eyes met. The brother-in-law unhesitatingly picked up the backpack. This immediately threw Matthew into panic. He desperately tried to stop his brother-in-law. As a result, the two began fighting. But due to Matthew's thin build, he was quickly pinned down. Matthew grabbed the fallen gun and hit him with it. The brother-in-law immediately stopped breathing. But Matthew, having no experience with killing, was terrified. He sat there, dumbfounded by the bed. But soon, he came to his senses, hurriedly found a garbage bag, and dragged him into the bathroom. Then went to the brother-in-law's room, collected all his belongings, and packed them into his bag. After he had handled all the details, he He found bloodstains on his hands, but Anna was calling for him repeatedly. So he hurriedly sat back at his desk. When Anna entered the room, he was pretending to be busy. Only after Anna left did he begin to clean the blood from his hands, but the marks on his neck were very obvious. Because of this, he put on a black polo shirt. However, shortly after leaving the room, he encountered his father-in-law looking for the brother-in-law. After inquiring, his father-in-law thought the brother-in-law had left without saying goodbye. Given his coming and going personality, the family was already accustomed to it. That night, he went to a deep area of the sea. He tied weights to the body. When the body completely sank to the bottom of the sea, he finally breathed a long sigh of relief. Afterwards, Matthew met with the older man and gave him the stolen antique gun, hoping he would stop harassing him. But unexpectedly, human greed cannot be satisfied. The older man used his identity as the veteran's son to threaten Matthew, demanding more benefits. This left Matthew helpless. He could only obediently submit to being exploited. Physically and mentally exhausted, Matthew returned to the mansion. His wife had been waiting for a long time. She suspected Matthew must have had an affair. Otherwise, he wouldn't stay out all night. But no matter how Matthew explained, Anna wouldn't forgive him. This forced Matthew to play the emotional card, using sweet talk to express his suffering. Only then did he regain Anna's trust. After several days of turmoil, Matthew had fallen into deep fear. But these personal experiences unexpectedly sparked his creative inspiration. So he wrote down all the recent events and feelings, and created an autobiographical philosophical analysis of human nature. Soon his draft was complete. He named the novel Fraud. But just as his career was about to see a second spring, the police found the brother-in-law's body. They visited to investigate. This made Matthew panic again. What he didn't expect was the police found the murderer's shoes in the package. Just by comparing DNA, they could easily find the murderer. But it would take a whole week. Hearing this, Matthew was immediately terrified. He even showed unexplained vomiting symptoms. However, just as he got some relief, the older man called again. He knew Matthew had a wealthy father-in-law, so he demanded €1,000,000 in hush money. Obviously, Matthew didn't have it. He didn't want to do more harmful things, but the older man wouldn't listen. After he finished the call and returned to the living room, by chance, Anna's family was going to the brother-in-law's home for the funeral. Matthew saw an opportunity and asked to stay behind to watch the house for his father-in-law. At night, he looked at his sleeping wife. His heart seemed to have made a major decision. As Anna's family prepared to leave, he gave the manuscript of his new work to Anna and asked her to send it to the publisher. The two then embraced. Little did they know, this would be their last embrace. Watching Anna leave reluctantly, Matthew's heart was filled with mixed emotions. He packed all his belongings and disabled the passenger airbag, while also blocking the seatbelt slot with a coin. Seeing the older man arrive as agreed, he slowly drove the car to the older man's side. When the older man got in and tried to fasten his seatbelt, he found the slot unusable. Matthew just glanced at it, and the older man gave up on the seatbelt. Matthew drove toward the villa, his face unusually cold. No matter what the older man chatted about, he didn't respond. Suddenly, Matthew floored the accelerator. The car's speed increased rapidly. Before the older man could stop him, they crashed into the mountainside. As the fire consumed the entire car, the pressure in his heart was finally relieved. Matthew used the older man's death to fake his own death in a car accident, ending the entire lie. Soon, Matthew's death made the news. A genius writer killed in a car accident made many readers and fans feel regret. However, a year later, Matthew had grown a beard, facing the world with a different appearance, returning to his old profession. But one day, after receiving his paycheck and leaving work, he passed a bookstore in heavy rain. His new work, Fraud, was displayed in the window. Matthew couldn't believe his work had become such a bestseller, so he prepared to go in and buy a copy. But just as he looked up, he saw a familiar figure. Anna was reading the content of the book to people, occasionally shedding tears of sadness. Matthew felt deeply guilty, but as his wife's gaze shifted, he also looked to the other side. It turned out that Anna had been pregnant and had given birth to a very cute child. Matthew stared in shock, firmly suppressing the impulse in his heart. Although his heart was full of unwillingness, all this was arranged by fate. He had no way to change it. He could only look at his wife and child through the glass. Tears mixed with rainwater blurred his vision. At that moment, he truly realized that the fame and fortune he craved were nothing but illusory bubbles, while the truly precious things had already been destroyed by his own hands.